Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that this week's episode is brought to you by my new online course, Become a Superhuman. And yes, it sounds exactly like the title of the podcast, but this is actually an online course where we go into the various aspects of improving your health, specifically your endocrine health. More specifically, getting your testosterone up to the optimal levels. Now, whether you're a male or a female, as we've learned in numerous episodes of the show, testosterone is the ultimate feel-good motivation, improved health, improved fitness, improved body composition, super drug. Okay, so everything from your mood to your recovery time and everything in between is affected by your body's endocrine health. And what my team and I have done is we've actually taken years of my own self-experimentation, years of research, every possible literature and study we could find, and we've condensed it into a simple 3 to 4 hour program that you can follow along and make simple, safe, and easy adjustments to your lifestyle to improve your endocrine health. Now, as listeners of this podcast, you can get a very special discount by visiting jle.vi/T. That's jle.vi, just like my name, /T for testosterone. This episode is brought to you by Organifi. You know, the one thing that literally every single diet and nutrition expert that we've had on the show seems to agree on is that we need to eat more veg and get our greens and consume all natural products. But let's be honest, how many of us actually have the time? Well, recently I had the opportunity to meet some of the folks over at Organifi, and I've been absolutely blown away by them and their product. You see, Organifi is an organic superfood green juice powder that literally covers all your nutritional bases without having to eat 5 bowls of kale. It saves you loads of time, loads of money, and a lot of chewing. And really all you have to do is add water and drink it. So to check it out and save an incredible 20% off your first order, visit Organifi.com. That's ORGANIFI.com and use coupon code SUPERHUMAN at checkout. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's show. You guys, before we get started, I want to read you an awesome review from Mike G in the Philippines, who says, "World-class performers only. This is the most in-depth podcast on world-class performance that I've ever listened to. Jonathan has really given us an extraordinary gift. So many episodes I have found myself listening to again and again. This is a must listen to for those who are determined to become the 1% that change the world." Wow, Mike, thank you so much for that review. I really do appreciate it. And if anyone out there hasn't left a review yet, well, please go ahead and do so. On to this week's episode, you guys. Today, we are joined by Justin Mayers. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's an author. More recently, he's the founder of Kettle and Fire, which is a very rapidly growing e-commerce company specializing in ultra healing bone broth. You might not know what bone broth is, but we get into that. Justin is also widely regarded as a marketing expert. He's been involved in no less than 2 startups that were successfully acquired, and he's the author of the book Traction, The Startup's Guide to Getting Customers. He's done all that by the age of 27. Now, our goal for this episode was less on the business side, though I did definitely want to touch on that. As you guys know, I'm fascinated by marketing, and I found out that Justin and I really share a lot of the same values and ideas there. But really, the main focus was to share with you guys a rapidly growing trend in the health space, which is bone broth. So we talked about marketing and entrepreneurship, but we really went into what bone broth is, why it's beneficial for your health, why you should consume it. We talked about physical fitness and stuff like that as well. Surprisingly, we also touched on speed reading, movement, and a lot of just really interesting stuff. I really enjoyed this conversation. So without any further ado, let me present to you guys Mr. Justin Mayers. Mr. Justin Mares, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here today. How you doing?
Doing great, man. How are you?
Dude, living the dream. Just really good interview after really good interview all lined up. So I'm pretty stoked.
That's awesome.
So Justin, tell us a little bit about yourself and your trajectory. I wasn't really sure, I don't like to put people in boxes, but as a podcast interview, somehow I have to find boxes to put people in. And you've got a couple different boxes. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So I kind of started, I guess, when I was in college. I went through a weird kind of period where I broke up with a long-term girlfriend, like my dad lost his job, just had a ton of stuff happen. And I kind of came out of this period where I, realized I wanted to do my own thing. And like for a while, that led me down the path of health, wellness, self-improvement, started eating paleo, started getting into tech startups specifically. So, started my first tech company in college. And then after that was in the tech world for a little bit. And then after an acquisition that we went through, basically was looking at like, what do I want to do next? And decided to do something that kind of fulfilled my passion for health and wellness, like bone broth. And specifically that was creating a convenient, like high quality bone broth company. And so bone broth was something I was incorporating into my life. My brother, who's my co-founder, he was also looking for a convenient source. He'd suffered a really bad knee injury while playing soccer and was bedridden for 6 weeks, like post-surgery. And during this time, he was like, what foods can help with healing? I suggested bone broth, and he went online to try and buy it and literally, couldn't get it anywhere. And so that was when we decided to start the company that eventually became Kettle and Fire and, kind of launched us into the health and wellness space, I guess you could say. Very,
very cool. So I want to get to that. Before we get into the kind of superhuman stuff, I'm actually really dying of curiosity to ask you just a little bit about kind of your marketing secret sauce, because you've been very successful at a number of startups and you've written a book, obviously, about marketing and gaining traction. So what's the secret, man?
Yeah. So all of my closely guarded secrets are in Traction book, but
okay. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So Traction was a book that I co-authored with another guy, Gabriel Weinberg. And the core idea behind Traction was that in today's world, the limiting factor on, having a successful company is often not, can you build a product, but it's, can you get it in front of people? Can you find an audience? Can you get traction? And so what we realized is that the kind of default reason startups were failing today was not because they couldn't build a product, like it may have been, 20 years ago, but it was that they just couldn't get traction. And so we wrote this book. It was the book that we effectively wanted when we were doing our first companies. And, the whole idea is like, we gave effectively a process that we called the Bullseye Framework, where you walk through this kind of exercise and this process of thinking to figure out what acquisition channels, what traction channels, as we called them, likely make sense for your business, given that you're trying to grow, acquire customers, all of that. And so I would say I have less of a secret sauce and more of like a approach that I and my team adhere to pretty rigorously, where we go through this whole process of figuring out what channels make sense, what channels are interesting right now, and then we focus really, really heavily and double down on the things that are working, and we cut ruthlessly things that we experiment with and may not be working as well.
Okay, so it's kind of a methodology for testing, trying, iterating, and essentially focusing in on the things that are really, really working. In a sense, it's scientific method applied to getting traction.
Exactly. And a big important part of that is that if you talk to most startup founders or most people on a startup team, you'll ask them, what are you guys doing to grow or to market yourselves? And they'll say like, oh, Facebook ads, blogging, maybe some AdWords, but they're often doing it in a really kind of haphazard way. And they're doing it with, call it 10 to 15% of their energy. Like half of our team right now on Kettle and Fire are literally marketers, and that's not including myself.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, we lean really heavy in that direction. And it's partially because, one, I think it's direct ROI and, it really makes sense. But the second reason is that if you're doing something like we are, where you're launching a health food company, there's kind of a limited window in which we will be one of, the only shelf-stable bone broth product. Like that's not going to last forever. And so for me, I think we should invest really heavily right now to get as much distribution as we can before things get a lot harder, you know?
That's interesting. And it's really refreshing because in startup culture, maybe not in business culture, but in startup culture, there is such a lack of focus on getting the product in front of people. And especially if it's an engineering driven company, people just seem to think if you build the best widget, then magically everyone will find out about it. And that is so far from the case. And there are so many instances where there are way better widgets and we all use the ones that are not that great because it's what we know about and because of the marketing firepower. There are much better beverages out there than Coca-Cola. There are much better jackets out there than North Face. There are certainly much better hamburgers out there than McDonald's.
Yep.
And yet we consume those products because at a certain point it becomes less about the product and more about getting it in people's hands. I'll go one further as to say, because a lot of people are uncomfortable selling. They believe that if a product's good enough, it should sell itself. And I actually believe it's your moral obligation. If you have a solution to people's problems, it's your moral obligation to get it in front of their faces. And I think it's a total cop-out to not do it.
Totally. I had a friend who, this is sort of a tangent, but he was really into, trying to find a girlfriend, and he would just walk up to girls on the street that he thought were attractive and like go introduce himself and say hi. And I was like, dude, how can you do that? That's so, I would just be so nervous and whatever. And he was like, well, if I think I'm a good person and I think that this looks like someone that I could get along with, like, she's looking for happiness too. It's almost like a moral obligation that I should try. We work together, well. And I was like, I have never thought of it that way, but I totally believe that.
It's so true. It's so, so true. I really like that. Okay, so Kettle and Fire, you've got a moral obligation, as I understand it, to get this product in front of people's faces. And as I understand, you guys are growing like crazy. You said more than half the company's marketing people. Talk to me about how you're doing that. I think it's an interesting insight into this methodology that you have published.
Yeah. So how are we structuring the team, or which part do you want me to talk about?
How are you growing the business, I think is interesting, just as a case study in how you've applied the methodology.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this, this product where the first kind of shelf stable beef bone broth, at least that's how we started. So the first company with a shelf stable bone broth made from all organic ingredients, 100% using bones from 100% grass fed cattle. Now, those attributes are things that our audience, our core consumer, really cares about. Mm-hmm. Like if you are a health nut or a health person, if you're trying to heal leaky gut, improve your skin, and improve joint health, those attributes like organic and made from animals that have been 100% grass fed are really important to you. And so what we've done is we realized that we have this kind of unique opportunity in this limited window where we're the only product fulfilling that need. And so we have pushed really, really, really hard to get onto pretty much every platform possible where our users are going to see us and immediately get like, oh, wow, this company solves a problem that I know I have. And so for us, it's like, let's get on Amazon quickly. Let's get on Thrive Market quickly. Let's get on, Lucky Vitamin, VitaCost, Vitamin Shop, Whole Foods, getting all of these platforms as quickly as we can. And so we did that. And then after we were on all these platforms, we started to see some organic sales just from filling a hole, just like a product hole in the marketplace. And since then we were like, okay, now let's figure out how to get more people discovering us on our own platform, kettleandfire.com. And so to date, we have invested a lot of effort in SEO. We're working on building out our content, doing a lot more content, and effectively just pushed really, really hard to, and are still pushing hard to make Kettle and Fire the go-to resource for someone that has any questions or interests in bone broth itself. And so we've done a lot in terms of trying to pick up that kind of long tail and organic search.
I like it. Okay, so let's get into the bone broth itself, because I feel like we kind of skipped over that a little bit. I'm a big fan of bone broth. I've got tons of homemade stuff in the freezer because no one will ship it to me. But can you tell the audience what the big deal is? I mean, like, isn't it just soup? I think probably people might wonder.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the difference is that with a soup, you'll oftentimes use a bone broth base, or there's something called broth or stock. And broth or stock, at least in the US, is often made with a bunch of like kind of crappy cuts of meat. It's cooked for 2 to 3 hours at like high temperature. And then they add a bunch of, the manufacturers will add a bunch of sodium. They'll add a bunch of additives, natural flavorings, quote unquote, natural flavorings, and all kinds of stuff. And that's because if they don't add that stuff, it just kind of tastes like salt water, because there's nothing happening when they're flash boiling it for 2 hours that's going to actually improve the taste. For us, what we're calling bone broth is a product that needs 3 things. So one, incredibly high quality ingredients. So we use real bones in the making of our bone broth. The other guys don't. We use really long cook time. So we cook our beef bone broth for over 20 hours, our chicken for over 8 hours. And what that long cook time allows us to do is it allows the marrow in the bones, it allows the collagen in the bones, and the bones themselves to break down and have a lot of the nutrients kind of seep into the broth itself. And to promote that, we use an acid. So we use apple cider vinegar that helps the bones break down and helps pull the marrow out of the bones themselves. And so those 3 things, the apple cider vinegar, long cook times, and using real bones, lead to a product that is incredibly high in protein. It has a bunch of amino acids and other nutrients. And just like you would make homemade, there's so much collagen and gelatin in it. When you pour it in a glass or something and then pop it in the fridge, once you let it sit overnight, it will actually firm up kind of like a gelatin or a jello, and that's something that literally no other bone broth company out there can claim.
Right. So talk to me a little bit about the health benefits. I mean, why would I drink bone broth? I'm kind of playing dumb here because I'm like a devotee, but for the sake of the audience, tell me a bit about why I would want to drink gelatinous beef bones.
Yeah, great question. So this is why I got into it myself. But, I was a guy that was eating relatively healthy. I'd done a lot of reading around the paleo diet. And the more I got into it, the more I kind of appreciated the need for some extra nutrients outside of what I was just eating. Like at the time I was eating a primarily organic diet. So organic fruits, nuts, veggies, and then organically raised meats. But even eating, all of that, which looks pretty good, especially compared to the average American's diet, I was still missing a lot of the amino acids and proteins, specifically collagen protein, that you get from eating organ meats, bone marrow, bone broth. And those are effectively the largest sources of some of these amino acids that are really important to your body. And so, there are a bunch of studies that have shown the benefits of these different amino acids. So, glucosamine, glycine, glutamine, gelatin, arginine, proline, all of these are amino acids that are present in large amounts in bone broth. And on top of that, you also get collagen, which breaks down into gelatin when you cook it, which help with digestion. They help with the liver removing toxins from the body. They help with healing and kind of sealing leaky gut. They help with bone health, skin health, you name it. Like bone broth is just chock full of what they call essential amino acids, which are amino acids that are essential to your body's function, but that your body may not necessarily make in high enough quantities where, it needs to get them from your food sources.
Got it. Okay. So that's a really, really good summary. And I know it also has some interesting kind of side effects like improving the skin and all that stuff, but also can reduce your need for protein intake and can kind of repair the gut, which I think is so important for so many of us who have lived on a grain-based diet for much of our lives and have all this just nasty gut stuff and nasty gut problems. Anything else that we missed that we didn't kind of cover on the health aspect?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really interesting study that came out recently that showed that taking gelatin, which is in bone broth, along with glucose, like if you effectively ate a bunch of sugar but also ingested gelatin at the same time or around the same time, the gelatin attenuates or basically decreases the GI spike that comes from the sugar by about 50%. And so what that means is that if you're getting some of these amino acids, some of these proteins, along with even your standard, like even if you eat a big pasta meal or eat some sugar or whatever, that your blood sugar is not going to raise as much just due to the presence of these other amino acids, of these other proteins, which to me, I think is really, really interesting. And it's why I'm starting to incorporate bone broth into a lot of my meals as well, because there's some research coming out around how glycine and gelatin help clear out, excess methionine, and which can build up when you're eating large quantities of meat protein.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really, really interesting. I hadn't actually heard about those ones. So really, the whole bone broth thing fits perfectly in with the paleo movement because, like you said, our Paleolithic ancestors, they didn't throw away bones. If they managed to get a kill, they were going to use everything. And so we've cut a lot of those organ meats and stuff like that. But isn't it true that our grandmothers, 40 to 100 years ago, were making bone broth? Or is there any kind of difference between the non-processed stuff that grandma made versus what all this research is being done about?
Yeah. So you're completely right. Like for most cultures, most individuals, their grandmas probably made exactly bone broth when they were growing up. It's like a lot of things, at least here in the US, that where you see this healthy food that's been traditionally made, and then these large kind of older food and beverage companies come along, try and make it cheaper, they bastardize the actual product, and they end up making something that is a lot worse, that is nowhere close to the original in terms of health benefits. And so we're not really inventing a new product. We're just bringing bone broth back, like bringing back this product that has been so core to a bunch of cultural kind of ways of eating, and that, a lot of people experienced from their mom or the grandma when they were growing up, when they would just make a bunch of bone broth, using leftovers from dinner, or leftovers from chicken dinner or something like that.
Very cool. Okay, so it's really about the fact that our generation is not going to cook bones for 40 hours. I do it, but most people are not. And so it's bringing back this healthy food that probably we've all been eating all along. There's no kind of new magic here, but it's something we need to reintroduce back into our diets.
Completely. Yeah.
I love that.
I'm very much a better living through convenience type guy.
Totally.
I think that, sure, maybe there are a lot of people that would say you should cook every single meal, from scratch using all organic ingredients, farm source. I'm totally on board with that if you have the time. I just think that it's unrealistic to have incredibly high standards like that and then just have people continue to fall short. And by falling short, they just will drink Soylent or eat McDonald's or do something else that's horrendous for them. I'm much more on board where, can you get people a super convenient, super accessible way to still maintain and improve their health? And I think a lot more people will choose that option.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me a little bit about recommended dosage. How much, how often, what time of day? I'm sure, as with anything that we take for health improvement, there's probably a pretty specific ideal dosage.
Yeah. So I think it depends what you're trying to accomplish. So if you are taking bone broth to try and, help with a certain health condition and you're looking to improve that, then I think it makes a lot of sense to consume probably 8 to 16 ounces a day. We have customers that, one customer in particular, she's been with us for, a year and a half now. And she's the type of person that drinks 1 to 2 boxes a day. And so,
they come in boxes. A box is one serving, you're saying?
So a box is 16.2 ounces.
Okay. All right. I thought a box was 6 servings. I get what you mean. Okay, cool. I'm with you.
Yeah. So she drinks it because she's specifically trying to heal a digestive issue that she's had due to treatment from basically a really tough antibiotics regimen that she had to go on after having Lyme's disease. And so for something like that, I think it makes a lot of sense for her to consume a lot. For someone like me, I'm drinking, 8 to 16 ounces a day, pretty much as I feel it. I'm doing it for general health reasons and not to fix any specific issue. And so for me, I'll probably have a glass in the morning and then oftentimes in the afternoon, just kind of as a pick-me-up.
Mm-hmm. And you're drinking it at room temperature, or you need to drink it relatively warm because of all the gelatin in there?
Yeah, I like to drink it warm for sure. It's far better that way, I think.
Okay, very cool. So let's switch a little bit into you specifically. I want to understand, you're the serial entrepreneur, always been focused on health. I'm sure you've been exposed to a lot of different ideas and strategies around human optimization, which is really what we love to talk about. So are there any other skills besides the bone broth or habits or routines that are a part of your life that you feel make you perform at a much higher level?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one easy one that I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard is meditation. Like I have gotten off of that wagon for most of last year, just got busy and, recently have started to get back into it and just have been really happy and really impressed and reminded of why it's such an important habit. So that is something. Another thing that I think is really helpful is I don't think people appreciate how much moving your body and being flexible and kind of limber is a useful thing and like how it improves your energy. So I now have a stretch routine that I try and do every single day that I have found just puts me in a better mood, but also just makes me feel better in general throughout the day. Like, totally. Especially as I'm now kind of, I'm 27, I'm now shifting a lot of the way that I eat and a lot of what I do to optimize for long-term health, as opposed to like trying to set personal records on bench press or squat or whatever it is.
Sure.
And so I found that stretching is really, really, really key for that.
Absolutely. So I just got off the call. I think this one's going to come out after that episode. Yeah. So the episode I just recorded, which was last week's episode, was with Jason Niemer, the Acro Yoga co-founder. And he's talking about like the incredible psychological power of getting the body moving. So I think you're right on point there. And too many of us treat our bodies like a vehicle for moving our brains from meeting to meeting. And it's just this huge shame because there is such an incredibly powerful intellectual, psychological, and emotional component to the movement of the body that I don't think we fully acknowledge yet.
Totally. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, for me, it's like an energizing thing. I happened, like I said, I worked in tech for a while. And so my kind of default until a couple of years ago was, poor posture, kind of hunched towards a computer. And so I've done a lot of work in terms of opening up my thoracic spine and improving my posture, a lot of stretching and kind of lifts and exercises to improve all of that. And it's just made a huge difference in terms of back pain, focus energy, all kinds of things.
Talk to me about the thoracic spine routine because I've got like some nasty muscular dysfunction. I actually figured out what it is the other day, which is completely out of my control. It's a subluxating shoulder that I baby that causes just muscular dysfunction. But tell me a bit about what you do for the thoracic spine, because I think that's something, for those who don't know, the thoracic spine is basically in between your shoulder blades. It's the part of your back that you're abusing when you slouch over, as you're probably doing right now. And everybody sits up straight, stands up straight. There we go. Okay, good. So what's the thoracic spine routine? I'm interested to hear about that.
Yeah, so it's a couple things. So there's about 5 movements that I do. So one is just kind of down on my hands and knees. I'll put one hand behind my head and then flex the core or engage the core and then twist and try and get my elbow up to the ceiling. Do that multiple times on both sides. So that kind of opens it up on the sides. And then I get a foam roller and I'll put it on my lower thoracic spine. Again, engage the abdomen, put my hands behind my head and like try and stretch back over the foam roller while keeping the core engaged. And so that really helps open up the thoracic spine. And what's interesting is the thoracic is like, it has a range of motion of, between 12 and 15 degrees. And so these are not massive movements. They're just small movements that try and get the neurons firing more in the thoracic and get it more used to moving. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll find a table or something about waist height. And then I'll kind of lock my elbows and shoulders, put both of my arms straight out in front of me on the table with my head between my ears. And then again, engage the core and just kind of push down, and it sort of compresses the thoracic spine a little bit and just causes to open up. Yeah, that one's great. That I try and do like once every hour or two, just because it's so, and I'll do it for like, you can do 10 of them in 20 seconds and you're just like, okay, that felt good.
That's really good. It's kind of, basically it's what, if people are having difficulty picturing, it's what a cat does when they get up from a nap. They can put their paws out in front and then push. And what I like about that is most of us, because we keep our two hands in the middle of our body at a computer or on a phone all day, our pectoralis major and minor, the basically breast muscle, is so tight that it's actually causing the scapula, or I need to speak in normal English, it's causing the shoulders to roll in, and we all just become these hollow-bodied hunchbacks. And it takes a lot of work because it's chronic for most of us. But a good metric is if you hold your hands comfortably at your side and your thumbs point in, then your pectoralis major is way too tight. And that's one of the stretches. If you open your hands a little bit and do that exact thing, you're totally pulling the pec open, which is really nice. Yep. It feels amazing as well.
Oh, it does. That's the other thing, man, is like, unlike a lot of working out, at least for me, some people love that. I've never been like the type that loves pressing a ton of weight or anything like that. And, so it was always kind of a discipline to get me to the gym on a regular basis. Whereas this is actually, it feels sort of indulgent. Like, it feels awesome. You know what I mean?
I like it. So talk to me a little bit about habits and goals. I saw you wrote a podcast recently, and as you said, like, you've implemented this habit of doing it every single hour. What other skills or habits, or talk to me about your thoughts on habits and goals, I guess, is where we'll start.
Yeah, it's a good question. So my high level goal, I would say right now, is mostly focused around health and longevity. So I want to be a super healthy kind of older guy. And that's what I'm focusing on right now. And that's why I'm doing a lot of mobility work. That's why I'm trying to fix a lot of issues that I have, like my thoracic spine, so that it's not a problem when I'm 60. Like, my dad is the type of guy that has possibly never stretched in his life. And, when I was growing up, he would be playing soccer with us as kids and just like pull up with a hamstring injury on the regular basis, and I don't want to be that. And so I'm doing a lot of my eating, my thinking, like my health and fitness routines around becoming a more capable person, improving my energy, and also making sure that I'll be in a good spot for, when I'm 60, 70, 80, 90, hopefully 100, 110.
Amazing. So how do you go about setting the habits to make sure that you do that? Because I have to admit, I'm super impressed that you managed to do anything once every hour. I don't have that level of discipline.
Yeah, I would say it's like once every 2 hours or so, to be honest. But yeah, so I would say I use that kind of meta level goal and then inform habits underneath. So one of the first things I did is I did a bunch of blood work to figure out what areas I need to focus on the most. And like, I do this every couple of months, but I think that this sort of testing is really important. And so I had blood work done to figure out areas of nutrition and health that I could improve or need to focus on. I had a full physical evaluation done, which is how my guy suggested that I have a lot of work to do on my thoracic spine. I didn't necessarily know that until he told me. Like, I thought I had some muscle back pain. And so he was like, well, it's because your thoracic spine is like super, doesn't have much range of motion. So you need to open it up and like the back pain will go away. And so that, like, getting those tests done, and then also understanding that I wanted to be a better leader and be less reactive in my day to day. Like, those were three things I wanted to work on. And so I then built habits around that. So meditation to help being less reactive, help being more thoughtful. I think it helps with going deeper and like getting really focused into work that I'm doing. So meditation's one habit, just do it in the morning, 15, 20 minutes. And then the second one, my stretch routine, also do it in the morning or sometimes in the afternoon. That is, again, focused around longevity. And then eating wise, I would say my habit, I don't necessarily have strong habits there as much as I have like a baseline that I pretty much don't go below. By that, I mean, my baseline is like eating a paleo, slow carb, ketogenic diet. And I almost never break that except for the occasional cheat day.
Wow.
So that's like kind of what I do.
All right. I dig it. Let's switch into some rapid fire stuff. I want to ask you a kind of tough and weird question, which is, what's your superpower?
That's a good question. I would say for whatever reason, I'm pretty good at spotting opportunities or things that feel like opportunities.
That makes sense. That's a pretty good entrepreneurial superpower.
Yeah, that and speed reading. I'm like in the top 1% in terms of how quickly I can read.
Oh, that's awesome. So I teach speed reading that's like the day job.
Cool.
Tell me about that. How'd you learn how to speed read?
I was never formally trained. I just grew up. I was homeschooled for the first, until 5th grade. And I was quite a shy, introverted kid. And so I just read all the time, pretty much ever since I can remember. And I still read, 1 to 2 books a week. And so.
Wow, that's fast.
Yeah. So it's just something that I grew up with. I mean, I read a 1,000-page book when I was like 10. And I don't know, I don't know what it is. I know that I have a couple friends that have done speed reading training, and I'm like right at that level.
How fast are we talking? Have you ever done a diagnostic?
Yeah, I think last time I did it, it was I want to say 800 words per minute, but that could be wrong.
That's really good. That's really, really good. Do you have any tips to share with our audience about how to read faster, or is it completely second nature for you and you haven't really dissected it?
Yeah, it's pretty much second nature at this point. I mean, the only thing that I know I do that others don't is I do not, it's called subvocalize. You know all this.
Yeah, subvocalization. Interesting. Okay.
I think that's the biggest leap, at least from people that I've worked with or talked to about this, is just stop reading everything out loud in your head and
totally.
Just try and take it out of the audio section of your brain.
Totally. Exactly. That's exactly it. So, and I'm sure the audience wants to know, what level of retention do you keep?
Really high. I think the other key is reading books. It's not just about blazing through it and then saying you're done. I think you have to retain the info. And so, I have pretty high retention the first time through. And then 2 to 3 weeks after I finish reading a book, I'll go through again and just look at all the things that I highlighted and then reread them, mark them, maybe write them down in an Evernote file or not, but just try and go through and connect the ideas that I pulled out of the book into an already existing set of ideas that I already have in my head. And, that'll take 5 or 10 minutes per book.
Amazing.
After I've finished it.
That's amazing because it's something that we actually teach in our course is even if you have high retention the first time, you still need to do what's called spaced repetition. And we actually teach that one of the best ways to do it is go through Evernote, create highlights. So yeah, it always shocks me when I meet the world's fastest learners or memory experts. They're always using the same stuff, and whether or not they've been trained in it or just figured it out on their own. And, to quote so many different people, they're like, yeah, it's just what worked for me.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that people come to that on their own.
Yeah, that's funny.
Awesome. So let's switch here into rapid fire, Justin. I do want to ask you, or I think we already switched into rapid fire, but that wasn't rapid fire. Since you read so much, give me a list of a few books that have changed your life.
Oh, man. So in the last couple of months, I have read a couple books that have really changed the way I think. So The Sovereign Individual is one. Thought that was incredible. Totally changed my thinking around sovereignty, governance, that type of stuff. There's a series called, I think it's the first book in it is called The Fall of Giants. I think it's the Edge of Eternity series or something like that. It's by Ken Follett. That book walked through. Do you want me to just say books or do you want me to explain these things?
Either way.
Cool. That book was just a fictionalized trilogy around the rise of, it started pre-World War I in the US and in the UK, and then took it through to the Obama election in a fictionalized form. Super fascinating, very engaging. Wow. Love that book. And then Anti-Fragile is an amazing one. And Lessons of History was the most bang for your buck book that I have read in the past year or so. It's 100 pages and really, really thoughtful.
Awesome. I'm going to check that one out for sure. So next rapid fire question here, although don't feel pressure to be rapid fire about them. What are some products or services that you simply couldn't live without?
Yeah, good question. I'm still a Dig Reader guy. I use Dig Reader all the time. So that's definitely one that's amazing. Headspace is up there for sure. In terms of other stuff, Amazon is a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. I'm a pretty simple person though. I don't have a ton of apps on my phone. Slack we use as a team. That would be difficult to use otherwise.
Right.
But yeah, truthfully, I'm a pretty simple dude. I'm not a huge early adopter when it comes to using tools and stuff like that.
Fair enough. I mean, that's an answer in and of itself. So I want to be respectful of your time here, Justin. I do want to give you a chance before we wrap up to let people know where they can find more about you, find more about Kettle and Fire, and just kind of get in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can find out about Kettle and Fire. It's kettleandfire.com. So and is spelled out. And then to find out about me, I mean, I have a blog, justinmares.com, but I'm mostly would be happy to chat with anyone if they want to get at me on Twitter. I'm at JWMares, M-A-R-E-S on Twitter.
Awesome. So Justin, one last question before we let you go here, which is if people take away really just one message from this episode and they carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that one to be?
Good question. I think the biggest one there is just to kind of go after whatever you think you can do or think you want to do. Like the best way to start a business, I think, is to understand that you're going to fail and screw up and you're not going to know what you're doing and it's not going to feel comfortable or easy, but you just kind of make yourself do it anyway. And, be okay with not succeeding your first time around. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I think it's really a tragedy how many times people say they want to do something and they don't just because they're afraid of that like first month of hardship and pain. And, the truth is that goes away. And like anything you want to do for the most part is a skill. And I think you can learn that if you just dive in.
Totally. Spoken like a true entrepreneur and super learner. I couldn't agree more. Justin, I want to thank you so much for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. And I do hope we keep in touch, my friend.
Yeah, likewise, man.
All right, brother. You take care.
You too.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody or you are somebody or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingaSuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.